The Western United States entered 1991 with the chaotic energy of a dial-up modem. Loud, erratic, and impossible to ignore. The region was awash in major headlines, dramatic upheavals, and a cultural rhythm that seemed to grow more frenetic with each passing week. From the coastal cities of California to the mountainous enclaves of the Rockies, the West experienced both literal and metaphorical tremors, as national and local events alike shaped the daily conversations in diners, classrooms, newsrooms, and late-night living rooms. Pop culture, politics, and the shifting ground beneath people's feet gave 1991 a distinctive pulse, one that would leave its mark on the region long after the calendar had flipped to a new year. The year began under a heavy, uneasy atmosphere of international tension as the United States launched airstrikes against Iraq, signaling the start of the Gulf War. Across the globe, people were glued to their televisions, watching Operation Desert Storm unfold in real time. Out in the western United States, the conflict felt at once distant and immediate. In Los Angeles, the war played out on screens in diners, bars, and homes as Scud missile alerts shared airtime with celebrity gossip and reruns. In a city built on fantasy and make-believe, reality was breaking through the fourth wall. The entertainment industry, which had long thrived on spectacle, suddenly found itself producing movies by day while consuming real war footage by night. Writers were working late in Burbank while fighter jets lit up CNN broadcasts, a strange juxtaposition that underscored how surreal the moment had become. Elsewhere in the skies, a different kind of shockwave was felt. Pan American World Airways, once the epitome of glamour and global connectivity, filed for bankruptcy protection. For decades, Pan Am had symbolized the golden age of air travel, with its blue globe logo and white uniformed stewardesses. Now, the final chapter was being written, and with it, a whole era of transcontinental sophistication came to a quiet, almost embarrassed end. Travelers who had once sipped champagne at 30,000 feet on the way to Honolulu were now dealing with grounded planes and canceled dreams. On the industrial side, Southern California faced its own economic turbulence. The long-anticipated cancellation of McDonnell Douglas's ambitious A-12 Avenger II stealth bomber program left a $57 billion hole and thousands of aerospace workers in limbo. For the defense industry scattered across the deserts and suburbs of Southern California, it was a bruising blow. Less Hollywood drama, more cold economic reality. February opened with tragedy, quite literally on the tarmac. On February 1st, disaster struck at Los Angeles International Airport when a U.S. Air jet collided with a commuter aircraft operated by SkyWest. The impact was immediate and devastating. 34 lives were lost in a fiery, chaotic scene that shocked the nation and raised serious questions about safety protocols at major airports. For a city so reliant on flight, commercial, military, and cinematic, the crash felt especially close to home. The incident prompted investigations, policy reviews, and renewed scrutiny of the increasingly complex air traffic systems keeping the skies above the West Coast moving. While war continued abroad, California's economy was facing a slower, less visible upheaval. The early 1990s recession officially came to an end around this time, though for many residents, particularly those in working class and marginalized communities, it hardly felt like a recovery. In Silicon Valley, the foundations of a technological revolution were quietly being laid, but the boom was still years away. Garages in San Jose and Palo Alto buzzed with potential, but the future hadn't arrived yet. For now, economic activity was tentative, uneven, and fragile. In many towns across the West, the mood was one of cautious hope, tempered by layoffs, rising rent, and political uncertainty. March was the month when the western United States was forced to look in the mirror. On the night of March 3rd, in a quiet neighborhood of Los Angeles, a brutal incident unfolded that would reverberate across the nation. A motorist named Rodney King was pulled over by police officers. What followed was captured on an amateur home video, grainy, shaky footage showing LAPD officers repeatedly beating King with batons while other officers stood by. The video aired across local news stations and quickly spread to national broadcasts. The rawness of it, the inescapable violence, forced a public reckoning. The images could not be explained away. The story pierced through years of built-up tension between law enforcement and Black and Latino communities across L.A. It was a gut punch to the region's self-image, a stark reminder that beneath the sunshine and the palm trees lay deep fractures and unresolved anger. Protests began to build. Conversations about racism, inequality, and police power dominated dinner tables, talk shows, and city council chambers. The West could no longer pretend it was insulated from the harsher realities of American life. Just over a week later, attention turned northward, though this time the news offered a different kind of reckoning. On March 13th, the U.S. Department of Justice announced that Exxon would be held financially accountable for the Exxon Valdez oil spill, agreeing to a $1 billion settlement to fund the cleanup. For the people of Alaska and for environmental advocates throughout the West, it was a long overdue gesture. The 1989 disaster had devastated Prince William Sound, coating miles of coastline in crude oil and killing hundreds of thousands of birds, otters, and fish. Though the cleanup was far from over, the announcement marked a symbolic victory in the ongoing struggle to hold corporate actors responsible for the damage they caused. Amid all the unrest and accountability, there was still room for celebration. On March 25th, Hollywood took a moment to honor its own. The 63rd Academy Awards, held at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, saw Dances with Wolves sweep the major categories. Directed by and starring Kevin Costner, the sweeping Western epic walked away with 7 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. It was a throwback to the mythic American frontier, a tribute to wide-open plains and silent strength, for a region that had spent the month grappling with modern injustice and environmental scars. The Oscars provided a temporary escape. Hollywood reminded everyone that the West still had the power to tell stories, bold, romanticized, and influential ones, and that audiences, both local and global, were still eager to hear them. April delivered high drama in the American West, some of it deadly serious, some of it downright surreal. In Sacramento, a routine day at a suburban electronics store spiraled into chaos when 4 heavily armed gunmen stormed the Good Guys retail outlet and took 41 people hostage. For hours, negotiators scrambled to control a situation that quickly became one of the most intense standoffs in U.S. history. After prolonged negotiations and a tense atmosphere broadcast live to television audiences across the country, police stormed the building. In the end, 3 hostages were killed, as were 3 of the 4 hostage takers. The incident sent shockwaves across the state and raised urgent questions about law enforcement tactics, media involvement during crises, and the growing public anxiety over random violence in otherwise ordinary places. While that tragedy unfolded in the state capitol, down in the rolling hills of California, something altogether different was capturing attention in an entirely more peaceful way. A massive and wildly ambitious art installation known as the Umbrellas, conceived by the duo Christo and Jean-Claude, transformed the landscape. Thousands of giant fabric umbrellas, each standing over 6 meters tall, were unfurled across meadows and hillsides, splashing vivid color onto the dry terrain. The installation straddled both California and Japan in a simultaneous cultural spectacle. But it was the Western U.S. portion that drew crowds, camera crews, and art lovers from far and wide. Strikingly impractical, visually overwhelming, and completely mesmerizing, it was the kind of bold, artistic vision that could only take root in a place like California, where vast open spaces and eccentric imaginations often meet in curious harmony. May followed with its own kind of wildfire. Not just literal, though those were always a threat, but political, social, and cultural. In the middle of the country, an infamous butterfire caught attention for its absurdity. But out west, tensions were running deeper. Time magazine published a scathing expose on Scientology titled The Thriving Cult of Greed and Power, which struck a particular nerve in Los Angeles. The Church of Scientology, long entangled in Hollywood's underbelly, had cultivated close ties with actors, producers, and other influential figures. The article challenged its legitimacy in harsh terms and stoked a fresh round of public scrutiny, legal pressure, and internal defensiveness. Within L.A., the piece sparked debates about freedom of religion, manipulation, and the blurred lines between celebrity culture and spiritual control. Meanwhile, California's legal system handed down a major ruling in California versus Acevedo, a case that would ripple far beyond the state's borders. Stemming from a routine incident in Santa Ana, the case reached the U.S. Supreme Court, which ultimately ruled to narrow the scope of privacy protections when it came to vehicle searches. Police would now be allowed to search containers within cars without a specific warrant, provided they had probable cause. civil liberties advocates raised alarms, seeing the decision as part of a slow erosion of constitutional protections. But others viewed it as a practical necessity in the ongoing war on drugs and rising crime. Either way, the fact that such a landmark case began on the sun-bleached streets of Orange County reinforced California's outsized role in shaping American law and civil discourse. June arrived with a reminder that while people debated politics and policy, the ground beneath their feet remained as unpredictable as ever. On June 28th, a magnitude 5.6 earthquake struck near Sierra Madre in Southern California. The tremor rippled across the Los Angeles basin, shaking homes, rattling nerves, and causing damage to buildings and infrastructure. Though not the most destructive quake in state history, it was enough to send residents scrambling and served as a vivid reminder that California's fault lines are never far from the surface, both literally and metaphorically. For many, it reignited anxieties about the long-anticipated Big One and prompted a fresh look at emergency preparedness in quake-prone communities. But perhaps the most haunting event of that summer month occurred not beneath the earth, but along the quiet roads of South Lake Tahoe. 11-year-old J.C. Lee Dugard was abducted in broad daylight while walking home from school. Despite searches, appeals, and media coverage, she seemingly vanished without a trace, leaving her family and the broader community in anguish. The case would go cold for nearly 2 decades, becoming one of the most chilling, unsolved child abduction cases in the nation. Unknown to anyone at the time, JC was being held captive just hours away, hidden in plain sight in a suburban backyard. Her disappearance cast a long, dark shadow over the summer of 1991, and its eventual resolution in 2009 would horrify and astonish the country in equal measure. The skies above Hawaii offered an extraordinary celestial spectacle on July 11th, as a total solar eclipse swept across the islands, turning the midday sun into darkness for several brief but unforgettable minutes. For those lucky enough to witness it, the eclipse was nothing short of surreal. A moment when nature paused, casting the lush landscape of paradise into an eerie twilight. It was the kind of rare event that united scientists, sky watchers, and everyday holidaymakers alike, all staring upward in collective awe. The event sparked local watch parties, pop-up science fairs, and inevitably a surge in eclipse-themed souvenirs. Back on the mainland, while the heavens put on a show, political theater was unfolding with equal intensity. In Washington, President George H.W. Bush announced his nomination of Clarence Thomas to replace the retiring Thurgood Marshall on the United States Supreme Court. Though the decision was made across the country, its reverberations were felt sharply in California, where media coverage became relentless. News outlets across the West Coast dissected Thomas's record and braced for what many suspected would be a turbulent confirmation process. The state's progressive circles were already at odds with the nomination, while conservative commentators pushed back with fervor. The groundwork was being laid for a dramatic showdown that would dominate the headlines in the coming months. August began with a burst of chaotic creativity. On August 11th, children across the West Coast and beyond were introduced to something entirely new and gleefully strange when Nickelodeon launched its Nicktoons programming block. It wasn't just another morning cartoon slot. It was a wild, new breed of animation. Rugrats, with its squiggly lines and baby-eye view of the world, instantly caught on. Doug delivered earnestness and awkward charm, while the Ren and Stimpy show took viewers to the very edge of absurdity, with its surreal, at times grotesque, humor. These shows were unlike anything children's television had seen before, and West Coast kids devoured them. They became lunchbox icons, playground references, and after-school rituals almost overnight. Then came August 23rd, when the Super Nintendo Entertainment System officially landed on U.S. shelves. On the West Coast, particularly in California's bustling urban centers and sprawling suburbs, electronics shops were swamped. Enthusiasts queued up outside retailers in the early morning hours, some even camping out, eager to be among the first to get their hands on the console. Inside, displays of Super Mario World dazzled young eyes with their vibrant colors and slick side-scrolling action. The 16-bit era had begun in earnest, ushering in a new standard of gameplay and graphics that left older consoles looking embarrassingly outdated. For thousands of kids, weekends were suddenly booked solid. Just them, the SNES, and a bag of corn chips. Gaming culture on the West Coast wasn't just alive, it was booming. September, however, brought a darker turn. In Las Vegas, What was supposed to be a professional gathering of military personnel, the 35th Annual Tailhook Association Symposium, descended into scandal. Reports soon emerged detailing the sexual assault and harassment of dozens of women and even some men during the event. Over 90 allegations surfaced, most describing rowdy and abusive behavior in hotel corridors where military officers allegedly groped and assaulted attendees as part of a disturbing, long-standing tradition. The West, and especially Nevada, became the focal point of a firestorm that forced the U.S. military to confront deeply rooted issues in its ranks. The tailhook scandal became a national symbol of institutional failure and cultural rot, one that would reverberate through military reform debates for years. Meanwhile, in Sandy, Utah, a different kind of nightmare unfolded. What began as a seemingly routine day at Alta View Hospital turned into tragedy when a gunman stormed the building, taking hostages and killing a nurse. The incident sent shockwaves through the community and led to intense media scrutiny. It was a grim reminder that even quiet suburban spaces were not immune to the rising tide of domestic violence and public violence that the country was beginning to face more frequently. Still, September had its moments of revolution, not in the streets or courts, but in music. On September 24th, Seattle-based band Nirvana released Nevermind, a gritty, unapologetic rock album that would go on to redefine a generation. While the band hailed from the rainy Pacific Northwest, their impact surged down the West Coast with unstoppable force. Record shops in cities like Portland, San Francisco, and Los Angeles couldn't keep the album in stock. Teens traded cassette dubs and pored over the cryptic liner notes. Songs like Smells Like Teen Spirit blasted from bedroom stereos and high school parking lots, replacing hair metal with flannel-shirted fury. Grunge had officially arrived, and it brought with it the soundtrack to the West's disillusioned youth, reshaping not just music charts, but entire fashion aisles and attitudes in the process. October 20th delivered a living nightmare to the Oakland Hills. What began as a small brush fire quickly escalated into a devastating firestorm, driven by bone-dry vegetation, hot temperatures, and unforgiving winds gusting across the ridgelines. Within hours, entire neighborhoods were reduced to ashes. The blaze moved with terrifying speed, jumping freeways and catching residents completely off guard. In the chaos, 25 people lost their lives, and over 3,400 homes and apartment units were incinerated. Smoke choked the sky above the Bay Area, and the haunting orange glow was visible for miles. It was one of the most destructive urban wildfires in American history, a tragedy that exposed the vulnerability of hillside developments, especially those nestled in the so-called wildland-urban interface. The fire served as a grim warning about the risks of building deeper into areas known for cyclical droughts, steep terrain, and flammable chaparral. In the months that followed, city officials and emergency planners faced difficult questions about preparedness, warning systems, and the limits of suburban expansion in a fire-prone state. Elsewhere in California, televisions were tuned to Washington as the Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Judge Clarence Thomas dominated the news. Anita Hill's powerful and deeply personal testimony about sexual harassment became a national flashpoint, but it had particular resonance in liberal enclaves like San Francisco and academic circles throughout the West Coast, where conversations about gender, race, and power were already simmering. Families, friends, and co-workers debated the hearings with fervor, some seeing Hill's words as a necessary reckoning, others defending Thomas with equal passion. The hearings blurred the line between politics and culture, forcing even those usually indifferent to legal affairs to take sides. Meanwhile, further east in Killeen, Texas, a horrific mass shooting unfolded in a local cafe. Though the tragedy occurred far from the Pacific, its shockwaves reached the western states, still haunted by the memory of the 1989 Stockton schoolyard massacre, where a gunman opened fire on children with an assault rifle. That event had prompted some of California's earliest gun control debates, and the incident in Texas reignited anxieties. In towns across the West, public sentiment shifted once more, reigniting conversations about access to firearms, mental health, and public safety. Then came November, bringing with it news that stunned the sporting world. On the 7th of the month, Magic Johnson stood before microphones in Los Angeles and revealed that he was HIV positive. The announcement dropped like a bombshell. Johnson wasn't just any basketball player. He was a global icon, a symbol of optimism, charisma, and LA flair. His revelation shattered long-held stereotypes about HIV/AIDS and instantly humanized the crisis for millions who had previously seen it as distant or stigmatized. The West Coast, home to some of the most active AIDS advocacy groups, especially in San Francisco and West Hollywood, responded with an outpouring of support. Johnson's bravery marked a major cultural shift. Conversations that had once taken place behind closed doors were now happening on the radio, in classrooms, and around dinner tables. He helped reframe the epidemic not just as a medical issue, but as a societal one. A call for empathy, education, and urgent public action. That same month, on a brighter note, the premiere of Disney's Beauty and the Beast offered a sweeping reminder of what the West could still conjure when it put artistry first. Largely crafted by animators working in the Burbank and Glendale studios of Southern California, the film was a technical marvel and an emotional knockout. It quickly gained acclaim not just as children's entertainment, but as high art. An animated film with the emotional depth and musical elegance to compete with the best of live-action cinema. Critics lauded it, audiences adored it, and its eventual nomination for Best Picture at the Academy Awards would make history. The film signaled that Hollywood's animated renaissance was no fluke. It was a new golden age. December carried a different kind of weight. As the 50th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor approached, Hawaii and much of the West paused in remembrance. Veterans returned to the islands, media retrospectives revisited the stories of sacrifice, and a new generation reflected on the Pacific War's enduring legacy. But the big shift came on Christmas Day, when Mikhail Gorbachev announced his resignation and the Soviet Union dissolved. The Cold War, which had defined international relations and military policy for decades, was suddenly, almost anticlimactically, over. On the West Coast, home to key Cold War installations, aerospace firms, and anti-nuclear activism, reactions ranged from celebratory to cautiously optimistic. The threat of global nuclear war had hung over life for so long that its absence felt both liberating and slightly surreal. And still, life went on. As the final days of 1991 ticked away, Californians, undeterred by the year's upheaval, flocked back to beaches and hiking trails. In Seattle, the grunge scene grew moodier, more magnetic. Portland, never in a hurry, quietly continued evolving into a haven for counterculture, creativity, and caffeine. The Western United States had taken its share of hits that year. Fires, scandals, violence, reckonings, but it had also grown wiser, more self-aware. As midnight struck on New Year's Eve, the West rolled into 1992, not just battered and inspired, but with its rebellious edge intact and its eyes still scanning the horizon for what came next.
Come along, let's sing, where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 1 on X, we're here just for you, for you.